has been a great deal of evidence long before this very good piece of research being done by the Canadians. But for a number of years now, it's been suspected not only as a carcinogen, cancer-inducing, but also as a teratogen.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Tonight we're going to discuss the new foods, the saccharin issue, junk food, and hospital food. With me is Beatrice Trum Hunter, author of Food Additives and Federal Policy, The Mirage of Safety. Beatrice's earlier book was titled Consumer Beware, Your Food and What's Been Done to It. Her current book, to be published in the spring of '78, is titled The Great Pretenders, Imitation and Synthetic Foods. Beatrice, once again, welcome.
Lovely to be here. Of course, the saccharin issue has finally broken.
And that is a big issue.
It's a very big issue. On the good side, I would say that the good thing that has happened is that the Food and Drug Administration has recommended that tartrazine, which is a yellow coloring in many foods and drugs and cosmetics, that tartrazine should be labeled specifically because so many people have allergy to it.
Tartrazine is a dye.
It's a dye. It's yellow number 5. So this is the beginning. If we get one of these things labeled specifically, perhaps we'll get many more.
Let's talk about the saccharin issue a little bit. There are people who are saying that saccharin should have been banned a long time ago.
Yes, I'm one of them. The thing is that there has been a great deal of evidence long before this very good piece of research being done by the Canadians. But for a number of years now, it's been suspected not only as a carcinogen, cancer-inducing, but also as a teratogen and a mutagen. In other words,
explain teratogen and mutagen.
Producing either defective offspring in the next generation or a genetic threat to future generations. So these are very grave problems, irreversible ones.
Well, along with the people who were saying that saccharin should have been banned a long time ago, there's a great hue and cry against the banning of saccharin.
Yes, mainly from the people who wish to use saccharin but don't have to use it. The people who think that they can hold down their weight by using the diet beverages or foods with saccharin. It does not hold down the weight. What they really should do is to change their lifestyle in choice of foods.
Well, how do you answer that question? I mean, it is sticky. I mean, shouldn't it be a freedom of choice matter?
Yes, it should, but it should not be a hazardous thing that is allowed on the market when the hazards are suspected or known. You see, it's a very easy thing to declare saccharin a drug and make it available for diabetics who may feel that they need it. But this is quite different from allowing it to be used very freely in a number of foods and beverages which are readily available to the entire population, including children. And this is what's happened. In 1972, when the National Research Council had another review of saccharin, the FDA claimed that they wanted to limit its use, to limit it only for those who really needed it. But they took no action. And the labeling even was quite interesting. At the very beginning, when saccharin was put on the market, the labeling read that it was to be used for those who must restrict their intake of sugar, which would be the diabetics. But then that was changed to those who wish to restrict their intake of sugar, which of course brings in many, many people.
And you say that really it isn't helpful toward losing weight.
No, this has been shown. This was true of the cyclamates too. It did not hold down the weight, either in the test animals or with people in clinical studies.
Well, how was it determined that it was or was not safe at any given time? I mean, what were the tests? What were the bases?
It was on the basis of animal tests. And the recent ones on the part of the Canadians was based on the fact that the saccharin does induce tumorous formations, cancerous formations in the bladder of the rats. And it was especially obvious in the second generation. Now this shows the great need of the reproductive tests, and they're still not mandatory.
Well, I read somewhere or heard on the local news or something that you would have to drink such an enormous amount of these diet sodas in order to be in any kind of danger. Is that
This,
true?
this is a very
Of 812.
Yes, this is a very distorted piece of information that's repeated endlessly. What happens is that when the tests are done with the animals, they must test at very high doses because they have so few animals. In order to turn up any sort of adverse effects, they have to test at high doses. And this is an accepted piece of research which toxicologists understand. But unfortunately, the public does not yet understand this. Now, if you extrapolate the results from the rats to humans, people in the FDA have done this, and they've said on the basis of these tests, people who are drinking only one 12-ounce diet beverage over a period of time, 4 people out of 10,000 will develop bladder cancer. So you see, it's a very real picture, which means another extrapolation is that about 800 new cases of cancer every year in this country can be attributed to the drinking of the diet beverages or the eating of saccharin-contained food.
So really you're saying that there has been some manipulation of the figures to make it more benign than it appears?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a misunderstanding and a misrepresentation of the results.
Well, at this particular time, the FDA called into play the Delaney Amendment, which has been around for a very long time.
Yes.
And there seems to be some attempt now to water down or to do away with the Delaney Amendment.
Unfortunately, there are many groups in this country that are trying either to weaken it or to destroy it. And it's most unfortunate because it's the only piece of legislation that really has kept many cancer-inducing substances out of the food supply. It's a weak amendment. It actually should be strengthened. Now, the opponents of the amendment claim that it is very arbitrary and unscientific and rigid, and this is not true. If this were true, then saccharin would have been out of the food long ago. But there have been very deliberate investigations and evaluations. This has not come overnight. It's taken many years. And there is room for scientific judgment within the Delaney Clause.
Is an option to classify it as a drug?
Oh yes, FDA does have this option if it is actually banned. And the FDA also made an interesting statement, and this was that even if the Delaney Clause did not exist, the evidence is so strong now that they would still ban the saccharin.
So those people who are attacking the Delaney Amendment are, the Delaney bill, are not, are wasting their time, really?
Well, they still would, I think, like to weaken it or to defeat it, but it's the only piece of legislation that really gives us a modicum of protection against the cancer-inducing substances.
Well, are there alternatives that exist now to saccharin for the general population?
Well, there are no artificial sweeteners on the market at present that the food and beverage people can use as a substitute. However, what it really means is that people can get back onto much better food in terms of natural sweeteners. Because after all, there are things such as fresh fruit are very satisfying if you have a sweet tooth. Even the whole idea of the sweet tooth is something that has been developed because of our food choices. If you have better food choices, you lose the sweet tooth.
How do you think this will be resolved? I mean, what's your prediction for?
Well, my feeling is that if the ban does go into effect, the FDA will reclassify saccharin as a drug and make it available to diabetics or those who for medical reasons need it. The food industry and the beverage industry has started, even long before the ban has been proposed, to reformulate their foods and beverages.
We were curious to know what the AMA stand on this issue was, and we called Mr. Chappell at the Public Information Office in Chicago of the AMA, and the AMA, as you probably know, has taken no official stand on the saccharin issue, and the reason is because it's not a medication. It's merely a taste sweetener. Now, that was his exact statement to us. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I would say that in contrast, the Canadian Medical Association, which is the counterpart of the AMA, has come out endorsing the Canadian ban, or the Canadian suggestion for the ban. And the Canadian Dietetic Association, as well as the American Dietetic Association, have also come out with strong statements supporting the ban. There have been numerous physicians and cancer researchers who have also come out in support, and have also said that people who have come out in opposition simply have not looked at the data, because the data that have come out of Canada, the Canadian studies, seem to be excellent. They're very well done, and the proof seems to be quite clear.
Why in Canada and why not here? I mean, what is the difference in the setup there? Or why do things seem to happen more easily there and more quickly?
Well, the Canadian Food and Drug Directorate had been conducting the tests, the more recent tests, on saccharin. And very often they have done this, much to our embarrassment, because sometimes their findings of adverse effects are of substances that are still on our list of generally recognized as safe. And so the Canadians come out with these statements, and we're really caught, quite by surprise. So now there's much more close consultation between both of the governments before the statements are issued. And very often our bans have followed the Canadian research.
As one of the world's leading food experts, what do you recommend that people do about saccharin? What is your recommendation?
Well,
what
for years I've been telling people that I think that it was a substance that was best avoided. But that was true, I felt, of the cyclamates as well. Now, people will say, oh, but the diabetics have been using saccharin for almost a century, and there's no indication of bladder cancer. But I would point this out, that one doesn't necessarily get bladder cancer. One may get cancer in any other organ or tissue of the body. If you happen to have a weak organ, which might be heart or brain or liver or spleen or whatever, it may show up in another organ. So the epidemiology is a study which may give you trends, but it does not always give cause and effect for things. So that we don't necessarily have to have it in bladder cancer. It can be many other forms of cancer or other adverse effects on the body.
So your advice is to avoid it?
To avoid it. And there's really no problem of avoiding it, because if you stick to basic natural foods, then you have no problem.
Let's talk about some of the new foods. I know one in particular that you want to talk about are the egg substitutes.
Yes. You know, these egg substitutes have been put on the market with very little knowledge of how good they are in terms of the nutritional equivalency to regular eggs. Millions of dollars was spent on advertising, and the person who finally investigated, Dr. Kumaro, said that the company put in less than $100,000 for the research, and he felt that the research should be the thing that should be done. So what he did was to take rats, and one of the groups, he fed them farm shell fresh eggs, and eggs are, of high biological quality. And they did quite well as eggs were the sole article of the diet. And the other group of rats did very poorly. They were the rats that were fed the egg substitute for a few weeks. Actually, the experiment had to be ended before the time that he had thought he could carry it through, because the rats did so poorly. Would you like to see a sample of from each group?
I believe we have a slide.
Fine. And I don't think you have to be told which rat was fed the regular eggs and which the substitute.
Right.
And the company making this product happens to sell a great many of the egg yolks, so the egg white was kind of a byproduct and something that they really had to use as a byproduct.
Do you think people still assume that if it's on the grocery shelf, then it must be safe, and that the government has probably approved it and tested it?
I find less of that attitude than formerly. I found years ago that people would say, that if something is being sold and it must be safe, but there are so many things that have happened, not only with foods but many other consumer goods, that I think people have a healthy skepticism now. Because almost every week there's some new surprise.
Another new surprise is the butter, the new, I don't know what you call it.
Oh, yes. There is a substitute product which is now being
It's synthetic
used.
butter, right?
Right. There's no butter in it.
Yeah.
And restaurants are resorting to this material as a drawn butter sauce. So when you get drawn butter sauce in a restaurant, you don't really know if you're getting butter or this imitation food. And people who have eaten it tell me that it really tastes very much like butter. It's much cheaper than butter, and that's probably one of the reasons why the restaurant people are using it. We do need truth on the menu, and some states have been pressing for this kind of legislation.
I know we talked about that the last time you were
Yes.
here, and needless to say, there's been no change
It
in that
hasn't,
situation.
as far as I know, it hasn't really gotten anywhere.
Also, you told me that raisins are not raisins anymore.
There are imitation raisins. The raisin crop was supposed to be very short and expensive, so bakers now have a product which is frankly imitation raisins. It consists mainly of sugar and a lot of vegetable fat, probably saturated, and artificial or natural and artificial raisin flavor. So when you pick out the raisins from the cookie or the muffin, you really don't know what you're eating.
It's true of nuts as well.
Yes, there are also artificial nuts that bakers are using in a number of products.
Well, one of the things I know you strongly advocate is a careful diet.
Yes.
But it appears that that's becoming increasingly difficult, that it's an almost impossible thing to do.
If you're using a great many of the convenience foods, it's almost impossible to know what goes into them. Even if you're reading the label, you don't always know what the thing means. If you are eating in restaurants, then it becomes even more of a chance because you don't know what is being done in the restaurant. Did I tell you about the baked potato I had in one restaurant not too long ago?
I'm not sure I want to hear.
Well, I always feel baked potatoes are a fairly safe bet. What can they
Sure.
do to them? They're either overcooked or undercooked, but otherwise it's still a potato. Well, I ordered a baked potato, and what came was a potato which was prepared elsewhere. The inner part, the pulp, was made from reconstituted potatoes, and the shell, it was served half of a potato only. The shell of it was ground up potato skin, which was reconstituted as a potato skin so that every one was exactly the same size and shape as the next one. And of course, to put that back together, they probably used modified food starch and a number of other things. And all of the flavoring was synthetic, I'm sure, probably imitation cheese in it. I sent it back to the kitchen.
I was going to ask you if you, I knew you didn't eat it. But the question was, did you throw it at them or did you quietly
No, but
send it
I
back?
told the waitress that I had ordered a baked potato because that was on the menu, and that was not a baked potato. That was a reconstituted baked potato.
Well, would you advocate people doing that in restaurants?
I think so. I send back the chicken sandwiches if it's not real sliced chicken, if it's this reconstituted chicken in the chicken loaf or the turkey loaf. Yes, I think people should speak up. I tell people when I like what I've gotten in restaurants, I think we should also commend people, especially if it's a homemade soup that's prepared on the premises. But if it's not what it's supposed to be on the menu, I do tell them.
Of course, another big issue at the moment is the fiber. Fiber
Yes.
in bread especially. I see people in the supermarket with fiber bread in their shopping carts. And
Yes, there's a great renewed interest in fiber because it's true that through the years we have eaten too little of fiber since we no longer eat as many fruits and vegetables as we used to, and the whole grain breads. How much is enough? This is a moot question. We don't know. There is such a thing as having too much fiber. And the thing that is now being put into some of the specialty breads is not fiber from the natural traditional sources, but it's from wood pulp. And many of these breads which say 400% as much fiber as in whole wheat bread. This is from wood pulp, and it tells you on the label, if you read the label, it will say purified cellulose or from the wood pulp. Now, we have no idea of whether we handle wood pulp in the same way that we handle traditional fiber. We certainly don't know how much we need. We don't need 400 times as much.
I mean, I don't think I need any wood pulp.
Neither of them have nutritional values, but there are many very exaggerated claims being made for the fiber in the diet, whether it's bran or the wood pulp. And many of these claims are not justified at all.
Well, is anyone...
Has allowed the use of the wood pulp on the basis of very brief feeding experiments with dogs, a very brief period of weeks, and a few clinical studies with humans. Over 3 months was the longest study. Now, this does not give you any indication of what happens over a lifetime. And this wood fiber, the purified cellulose, is not only being put into these high-fiber breads, but the pulp industry, this is the paper industry, is now trying to sell these products to food and beverage processes to use in a wide variety of foods and beverages. So we're going to get much more.
Fiber in a beverage, for example?
As an emulsifying or thickening agent, and in meat casings, and in mashed vegetables, probably potatoes, yes, and maybe other mashed vegetables, in cookies, they have many uses suggested for this. So we're going to get a great deal of the wood pulp, which is not only not nutritive, but it's replacing foods with food value, which are of course more costly, because the wood pulp is much cheaper in price than the flour that goes into the bread. So this appeals to bakers. Also, these are high-priced items because they're specialty items for sale.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much more expensive loaf than a loaf of bread.
All right, how can we get fiber more naturally and seemingly more safely?
From very common foods. Any of the fresh fruits and vegetables have fiber, and so do the whole grains and cereals. And when we eat them in that form, the fiber in that form, then we're eating it, the fiber, in forms where we're getting other minerals and vitamins and other things that probably should be used along with them. When you speak of dietary fiber, it's not just one thing. There are many kinds of dietary fiber, and they all act quite differently.
Last time, this is your 4th time on now, over
Yes.
a period of a couple of years. And the last time you were on, you and I talked at the very end of the program about natural cooking and going back to basics. Mm-hmm. And one of our viewers was rather disturbed by that and felt that many women feel that they have 2 full-time jobs, many working women, the job that they have outside of the home and inside the home, and that it should be shared. And I believe her quote was, "Miss Hunter, although her intentions are good, sometimes sounds like a Phyllis Schlafly going about the country telling women that they should go back home and take care of their families in the traditional serving and subservient role." Now,
I never address myself merely to women. I feel that men are just as much part of this food situation as women are, and as a matter of fact now there's such a very high percentage of working women that, as you know, many of the men are doing the shopping or are doing the cooking or are sharing shopping and cooking, food preparation. And I think this is great. I also feel that it is not a drudgery, or it shouldn't be thought of as a drudgery. It's part of a lot of things that we do, and it should be done with a great deal of interest and enthusiasm. I feel that it's one more form of bonding between people if they share the interest in shopping and in food preparation. I think we've been very much brainwashed to think that food preparation starting from scratch has to be drudgery. It is not. This is pure myth. I can prepare a meal in the kitchen from scratch in no more time than it takes a person who's using a lot of convenience foods. Now, a lot of the drudgery has been taken out of it. We no longer buy a chicken and have to pluck the feathers and singe the chicken. There are many other things. If we have to, that is, if we don't want to make bread, we certainly can find good breads. So that it's not a drudgery. It's not a long time consuming thing. I think we eat much simpler in terms of, that is, in terms of the type of preparation that we do if we cook from scratch. And I think that there's a great deal of time saved in the shopping. because if you simply scoot around and get the basic foods, then you're not having to go through the entire supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that men are just as much concerned about as women. I never address myself just to women.
Well, I hope she's listening, and
I hope so.
I hope that answer satisfies her. We only have about 2 more minutes, and we have about 10 more things that we want to cover. But one of the things I did want you to address briefly is hospital nutrition. I read an article that started out that it said malnutrition is the skeleton in hospital closets.
Yes,
would you want to comment on that?
Yes, surely. That was Dr. Buttersworth who really raised a great storm, showing that many hospital food actually induced malnutrition because the hospitals were not paying attention to the diet. And this has set a lot of interest started in this direction of paying attention to food. Unfortunately, much of the hospital food is now coming in from the outside, prepared, frozen, or canned, where patients should be getting freshly prepared food. The reason being, of course, labor saving and so forth. But the very people who should be getting better food are not always getting it for this reason.
Does the patient have any recourse?
I suppose it depends upon the hospital, but there should be an awareness of the fact that these are patients who should be having fresh food without all of the additives, because every time the food is prepared elsewhere, it's filled with additives, and it means that it has to be cooked or recooked, and this too lowers the nutritional value of it.
We're out of time, and I'm very sorry.
I
Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.